Welcome to this installment in the series, What's New with Lightroom, a TPPA event series that'll be happening every other month during 2021. So look forward to April, June, August, October, and December. Mark your calendars for the third Wednesday of each of those months, April, June, August, and October, as we continue the series reviewing what's new with Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, and Lightroom Mobile. For those of you who'd like to find out more information, feel free to reach out to me at any of these Facebook addresses, as well as my email at whatsthatguysname@live.com. As we go through the presentation, to help it look a little bit more clear to you as far as where I am on the screen or what you should be following along with, be sure to look for the blue box. If it's blue, it's a hint of where I am on the screen. So you can see in that example, I'll occasionally use the blue square to show you just where I am on a specific screen. Again, if you have any questions or concerns after watching the video, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or via email. What I'd like to talk about this event is about the cloud subscriptions, the Creative Cloud subscriptions, and where you can get the most value from those different Creative Cloud apps. If you take a look at this straight off of the Adobe site, you'll see that the most popular plan, they say, is the $52.99 plan, but for most of us as photographers, it tends to be this $9.99 plan over here on the left instead. The $9.99 plan is popular because it includes Lightroom on desktop and mobile, in other words, your iPad, Android, other devices. It also includes Lightroom Classic that we've known for years and years and years, the classic design that we've seen for so many years. And it also includes Photoshop that can be used both on your desktop and your iPad. Some of you may not realize it, but you also get your own portfolio website and you get some social media tools plus 20 gig worth of storage. So for only $9.99 a month, that's a pretty good deal with Lightroom, both desktop and mobile, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop on both desktop and on your iPad and other devices, portfolio website, social media tools, and storage. So that's a pretty good bargain. But you may want to consider some of the other plans. For example, just to the right is the Lightroom plan. And you'll notice that the Lightroom icon right above it just says LR. For those of you who are looking at the Creative Cloud and you see that icon, that is the cloud-based version. If you're looking for the classic version, look for an icon that looks a lot like that but has LRC in the icon. But in this LR, that Lightroom plan, still just $9.99 a month, but it's only about Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic. It does not have Classic. So yeah, you'd get it on desktop, you get it on your mobile devices. You'd also get a much, much larger cloud storage because this particular plan is really based on the cloud. But I'll tell you more about why you might want to use Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic as we go along. Just want to make sure you're aware of the two different plans that are at the same price point but have significantly different values in not only what you receive as far as apps are concerned, but as far as storage. For those of you who may want to get everything Creative Cloud has to offer, you can get that for just $52.99. You'll notice again it's a slight variance. In this time you're getting 20 different desktop and mobile apps, including Photoshop, Desktop, Lightroom, Illustrator, all sorts of different apps, 20 of them. This time it starts off with 100 gig. So another opportunity for you to consider which option works best for your needs. If you did like that $52.99 offer and you are either a student or a teacher, you could save over 60% by getting all the apps for just $19.99 a month. Still the same 20 units of apps and Photoshop and Lightroom, etc. And still 100 gig, but now reduced just to $19.99. Okay. Something else you may want to take a look at is some of your options on the photography plan that we talked about a while ago. You can go from that 20 gig plan we talked about just a moment ago at just $9.99 to a 1 terabyte version at $19.99. So if you need extra storage, if when you looked at the Lightroom and Photoshop plan that included Lightroom, desktop and mobile, Lightroom Classic, and Photoshop, you said, wow, I don't know if I'm going to do cloud storage, I'm going to need more than 20 gig. There's your opportunity, 1 terabyte for just $19.99. If you need additional storage, you can also give Adobe a call. On their website, you'll see an 800 number you can call and talk about additional options above and beyond the 1 terabyte. What you do get in most of the offers that we've been looking at is, again, Photoshop Lightroom, Photoshop Lightroom Classic, and Photoshop itself. And then you'll also see additional opportunities for Photoshop Express and Photoshop Camera, some more mobile apps. One that's surprisingly not showing on here is you'll also have an opportunity to grab Lightroom for your mobile device. I use it myself. It's got a great camera feature as well. So again, those come with your subscriptions, depending on the subscription you've chosen. Look for these little icons up here to help you out as visuals as well. You'll notice that desktop, mobile, desktop only, desktop, mobile, and then here you also see graphics for the intended for use on your phones, such as those icons are indicating. Now, when you look at Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, you have a couple of decisions to make about your workflow or your specific needs. So here's a quick reference, again, right off the Adobe site. It really comes down to where you prefer to do your digital photography work. For example, Lightroom Classic, the one we've known for years. Here in the center column, it's really a desktop application. It can sync to the cloud, but that's not its intention. Its primary app is on desktop and intended for that use. On the other hand, the Lightroom version over here, the more modern version, is desktop, mobile, and web, but all connected to the cloud. So whereas Lightroom Classic is a local hard drive installation, Lightroom does have an installation as well, but it's looking at the cloud for its resources. File backup is not included in Lightroom Classic, and they mean files, they don't mean your images. So you want to have your own backup methods there at your own desktop. Whereas with Lightroom itself, the newer of the products, it's automatic, it's already there. And while Lightroom Classic is by far the most comprehensive with modules for library and develop and map and book and print and web, a total of 7 different modules, the Lightroom, the newer version, is far more intuitive and far more streamlined. Think of it as a cleaned up version of the library and develop modules in a way, because it's got those same tools for the most part, but much more streamlined. I'll show you a little more about it here coming up. From our organization and photo search, they both have their own methods, but you'll notice that manual keywords for Lightroom Classic, you have to put them in. But Lightroom itself, again, a more modern app, a little bit more aggressive, and it's using artificial intelligence in some cases to do automatic tagging and more intelligent search. Hopefully that screen gives you a quick idea of the differences between the two. Again, we'll go into more in just a moment. Okay. Now I'm looking at this one right here. I've just pulled up an image that looks really, really familiar. You'll see we've got the main section right here in the middle. We've still got that familiar thumbnail look. I can see some of my stars and my flags down here, but it looks a little bit different than you might expect. So is this Lightroom or Lightroom Classic? And by the way, the young lady in the picture, that's the amazing Summer A. Horton from Texarkana, and also a Texas school model. Everything you see in this image was enhanced from Summer's already stunning looks, and every single bit of that was done in Lightroom and could be done in Lightroom or Lightroom Classic. But the question is, which one's this? Let me give you another hint here. If we switch to that one, here's better 1, better 2, better 1, better 2. I'm going to go back to that first one, and while it's the same image and you're seeing very similar features on both, that specific look is Lightroom, the cloud version. So you'll notice it has some similarities, and I'll show you some of the variances coming up. But there's the Lightroom Classic that we've seen for years and years and years. I'll also show you some of the things that Lightroom does not have that Lightroom Classic has as we go through this presentation. So let's bounce over and take a look at one of the products. This is Lightroom. And again, everything in that image was done inside Lightroom. Could have just as easily been done in Lightroom Classic. Either way, it'd be the same result. But all the tools that were put to use for this image could be in either Lightroom or Lightroom Classic. But as we look at this, let's start looking at some of the differences where if you're in Lightroom Classic, you're going to go, wait a minute, what is that? I'm going to go way up here in the top left corner, and you'll see my cursor is blipping up in the top left corner, small little icon. When I click on it, it's going to give me a menu on the left. Now, unlike Library, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, you won't see those in Lightroom, but what you will see are some features that I would love to see all across all the different Adobe apps. For example, Learn, a great way to learn this product and other products. It is included in Photoshop to a smaller extent, but it is not available in Classic. But in Lightroom, you can use the Learn menu to go through and see exactly how to, in this example, learn the exposure slider. And it will actually show you a tutorial showing you how that exposure slider works. You'll notice it's moving over here on the right hand side. If I were to hit the try it now, it would show me ways to learn the exposure slider. But maybe that's not what I'm interested in. Maybe I'm a beginner and I got to start from scratch, or I'm an intermediate, or I'm an advanced user. As you can see, there's all sorts of learning topics that can help you rapidly get up to speed on this product, which is slightly different. There's going to be a little bit of learning curve. So here's a great way to help you get past those obstacles. You also might want to take a closer look at the tools. Some of the tools don't use the same name as Classic, and they may look slightly different in their icons. But if you were to look at Lightroom or Lightroom Mobile, they will share these same feature sets. So whether I'm on an iPhone or an Android device, they call it basics. They call it color, color mix, crop, etc. Some of the things where you're going to be going, what does that mean? Slightly different verbiage is used in geometry and in optics, for example. Those are words that you're not familiar with necessarily in Classic. The tools are the same. They've just been renamed in this particular product. You can also use the Learn menu to look at subject matter. Maybe I do abstracts, so help me out with how I can use Lightroom for that. Or I'm an animal photographer and I want to know more about how to use Lightroom to deliver results for animals or landscapes, close-ups, nature, any of these different tabs. And of course, you can go to these big panels down here on the bottom, the featured section, where you can see photographers' work that has been submitted and approved by Adobe and shows you very specific examples. Like in this particular one, it's showing you before and an after. This one is talking about correcting the white balance, right? So lots of ways you can get quickly up to speed with Lightroom if you're migrating from any other application or you're a long-time Lightroom Classic user and you say, yeah, it'd really be great, but here's your ways to get up to speed very, very quickly. Okay. Another menu item you may want to pick way up here in the top left-hand corner is Discover. When you click on Discover, you see even more opportunities to learn. Okay. You can discover all sorts of things from the community itself. You could be a member of that community by joining the Adobe Cloud subscription plan. You can actually submit some of your own edits. If approved by Adobe, they may appear here. What they'll ask you to do is to show a progression of what it is you're trying to demonstrate. So if it's a before and after, they'll need to see what your before is, what tools brought you to the after, and then of course the full after effect. So consider even submitting your own edits to the Adobe Cloud. Now with those in mind, I'm going to jump down to the things you might use once you've got past that learning curve. So I'm going to go over here to the All Photos. And there All Photos, remember it can sync with your mobile devices. So let's just say you're out on a vacation and you've got your phone or you've got a camera that can sync to the cloud or any other device that might happen to capture images while you're out and about. Wouldn't it be cool if when you took that picture in the middle of the park or in the middle of the boat or you're on top of that glacier, whatever it happens to be, that Italian restaurant, wouldn't it be cool if when you got back to your hotel and you synced your mobile device, it would pop into Lightroom Classic? Or for that matter, it'd already be waiting for you in Lightroom itself. Okay? And that's what you see here. You'll notice across my thumbnail there's some funny images because a lot of these are phone images that I've taken right off my phone. And they appear in Lightroom right away because my phone app and my Lightroom desktop version are talking to each other immediately. Again, you can sync them with your Lightroom Classic as well. Those can affect your storage options, so be sure to read more about how do I know what storage levels I'm at on either app. Okay. You can also filter some of those down. Instead of looking at 692, you can say recently added, and you'll see it gives you dates and times you can consider, and there's the volume. So on Saturday I added 12, Sunday I added 21, etc. You can also look at things by date, and it tells you 2021, etc. If I were to get more specific, it tells me January there were 30, February there were 46. So very helpful right off the bat. It's already done a lot of the dirty work that you might be doing yourself. Okay. Another one you can do is people. This particular one works very similar to what Facebook does, but in this particular case, it's looked at all of my 692 images I have synced, and of course you can sync a lot more than 692. This just happens to be what I have. And it's looked at all my images and said, okay, these are the people that I see amongst your 692. And amongst them, Summer is featured in 117. This young lady 17 times, 16 times, 16 times. And yes, I can come back in and name those individuals. Like that one right over there, I would say is my much, much better half. And that's the most beautiful girl in the world because those two are related to me. But it's already identified just based on facial recognition images from my 692 and plopped them into place for me. As you can see, it was doing it with artificial intelligence in the background. Lightroom Classic can do something similar, but it takes a little bit more effort on your part and is a much slower process as it goes through and crunches those images and tries to find these same results. In Lightroom itself, much, much more flexible and almost immediate results. Now, some of you on the call might be like myself, in which you use collections a lot. Collections inside Lightroom Classic is a great feature that has a counterpart inside Lightroom, but that's not connections. In this case, connections is ever so slightly different in that it connects you to your Adobe portfolio. I mentioned it earlier, when you get Lightroom, you've got desktop, mobile, and you've got a portfolio. That's the portfolio you can build. It's relatively crude. I'm not going to show it necessarily today, but it's got enough basics where if you wanted to share an image with your kids, with your parents, with a camera club, whatever it happens to be, if you wanted a quick and easy way directly from the app, you can use your Adobe portfolio. When you click into that Adobe portfolio, you can also have different portfolios waiting for them. You could have seniors, portraits, headshots in my particular case. Whatever you want it to be. You name them whatever you want, and you make as many as you want, and they can appear in your Adobe portfolio. So I could come in here and theoretically just say, well, I want to share all of my Texas School course description images with my upcoming Classic Texas School. Very, very easy to do inside here. It'll pop into my portfolio and they can see them there. Didn't have to go to Facebook, didn't have to go to my website, none of that stuff. It just syncs to Adobe. And you can invite people to those same portfolio connections. Super, super, super simple. Okay? And of course, it also keeps track of how many you deleted. I have 692. I've already deleted 252, for example. Another feature that it does come with, and this is going to get back to that collections conversation, because while collections is not specifically named in here, and some people accidentally say connections and collections are the same thing, they are not, as you just saw. The closest thing to a collection might be the albums or shared. Okay, they're calling them albums. Again, could be another way of looking at it from a connection standpoint, because what you can do here is, even though I have 692 photos up top, I've segmented those down so that in this example, Summer is in this particular album, 67 different images. Okay, and as you see, it quickly populates across the bottom, and those are the ones I happen to put in that specific album. It's not looking at artificial intelligence. I named it Summer A. Horton, and you'll see most of her images are in there because I put them there. Could have just as easily grabbed a people folder and done something like this, but you'll also see its other contents related to work that I've done with Summer, for example. Could have easily taken you the things I got to know, or the what's new down here, or this depth of field, which, by the way, that depth of field, I'll just show you that one real quickly. Those are screenshots right off my phone that I didn't have to do anything else. They automatically dropped back into Lightroom Classic. But these are very much like collections in that, let's say I've got Summer A. Horton 67 and I want to delete any one or all of these images. Let's say I wanted to get rid of this one over here or that one over there. Let's go ahead and, whoops. Let's click on that image and let's just say, nope, I don't want that one. So I'm going to hit delete. It's going to ask me if I really want to remove one photo from the album, because in that case I only picked one. And now it's going to drop it down and I'm down to 66. But if you look back up here, 692, I did not delete it from the total volume. I only deleted that one specific image. So like a collection, think of them kind of like playlists, in that I can take something from the larger group, in this case the 692, make a smaller set of it, in this case 66 images, and even if I manipulate those 66 images, such as culling things in or out, or if I make any enhancements to them through editing of cropping of any of those types of things, they'll still be there in the 692. Even if I've deleted them from here, if I make any changes to them down here, that change will also be reflected in the 692 as well. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and close that side of the menu back out and go back over here to the right hand side for just a moment. So again, this looks a lot like Lightroom Classic when I go to a full view, right? But in this case, I've just turned off one side of the menu. I can go back over here to the right side, and let's look at a couple of these different things. That one in the top right corner, remember I mentioned how it can feed a portfolio that other people can see? Well, what if your son, your dad, anybody who's looking at your portfolio wants to make a comment? You can actually view the activity of a specific image if need be. Now, this particular image I haven't sent out to anyone, but if I were to send that via Adobe Portfolio and invited someone to take a look at it, they could make their comments. They could also just do a simple heart, the like we've come familiar with in all sorts of different social media, but their comments would show up underneath activity. Okay, and again, you can see they can make text-based comments, or they can just do a simple like. Could be a client, for example, where I sent that image and said, hey, what do you think? And they might say, well, could you do something with that blue background? Could you make it even darker? Or whatever happens to be. They can tell you anything they need to. Here's where you could also share those types of things. Now, I'm not going to talk about the export at this point. I'm going to talk about the share down here. But that link gives you both share and export. Okay. If I were to share this to an individual, as simple as getting a link right there, let it have just a second. Got to create a link for me. And as you can see, it's made up its own Adobe-based link because everything's off the cloud. You can also tell it, hey, I'm only allowing people or anyone to view it, or only by invitation, right? You can see that I could also share it in different ways. Or I could, based on an email address, I could invite someone, customize certain specific things that they see, like if that's not the title, by default it will choose date and time. I could change that to whatever I want. So it could be a message to your specific client. I could even change the type of grid they're seeing, and I could change it from a dark, like I prefer, to a light appearance as well. So you can tweak things before you even send it to them. And again, once I've done that, off it goes, and they have a chance to view in my portfolio what I am showing you right now. Okay. Up in the top right hand corner, there's traditional help, and there's the syncing of the cloud. Right now it's looking at sync pending. I've temporarily turned it off just for a little bit so that I can make sure I don't have any bandwidth issues while running multiple apps for this particular segment of the TPPA event. Let me go ahead and open up these icons up in the top right, on the whole right side of the bar, and just walk you through those real quick as we go towards a wrap up. When you look in here, you will see that if I click on that, it looks like a bunch of sliders, because that's what they are. And those are very, very similar to Lightroom Classic. But you'll notice, again, some of the names that are used are slightly different than what you may be familiar with. We might have called Light Basic, and that's where you have exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks. So you're familiar with these sliders, but the categorize way of doing things in Lightroom is a little bit different. The categories will have, in some cases, different names, and in some cases, different grouping. Let's go down into color. You'll see Color Mixer, which was the old HSL. That's still available in Classic as well, but in this case, they've called it Color, which also includes color grading, which makes sense. Both Color Mixer and Color Grading are underneath that one. You could go to Effects, which looks very, very familiar. Some of this was put into the basic within Lightroom Classic, but in Lightroom itself, it's been put underneath the effects. There's also Detail, where you can sharpen and do noise reduction. And another new name for a category, Optics, right? This was under Camera Calibration, where you could remove chromatic aberrations and lens corrections. You may have seen our lens corrections as well as inside Lightroom Classic, but they changed it to the word Optics. And then Geometry is a new way of saying transform. A lot of these same things you would see inside Lightroom Classic under transform, but in this case it's geography. And again, you'll see a lot of the same features. You can still do guided corrections, auto corrections, level, vertical, full. So most of the feature sets are still there. They just may be under a different name. There's your cropping choices. Those are also slightly different than before. You'll still see a lot of the same settings that you did before, but you'll also notice they've got a few extra options here where you can also mirror both vertically and horizontally. You'll still be familiar with clone and heal. That's still available to you. You still got the brush settings like you've had before. Very, very familiar with those. There's your linear gradients, and there's your radial gradients. So a lot of these same features are carried over from Lightroom Classic into Lightroom, even though it's a much, much newer app. You'll also see a lot of these same things where you can copy settings, etc. So that brings me to what are some of the variances that you didn't see when we walked through some of these different things. So let me bounce back over to my PowerPoint and take a look at this. Now this is a non-scientific, just something I put together relatively quickly, but to give you some quick highlights between the two and subject for discussion. If you look on the left, you're seeing Lightroom. On the right, it's Lightroom Classic. But what you will see on the left on that top row, for example, is Learn and Discover. Those are things that are in Lightroom. That Lightroom Classic may not have those specific things, but Lightroom Classic does have those 7 different modules: Library, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, Print, and Web. Lightroom on the left-hand side, okay, it will have all photos. Well, Lightroom Classic doesn't use such a thing. You could kind of say that sort of thing. That would be your catalog inside Lightroom Classic, but they're not quite the same thing. It's much, much easier to share inside Lightroom as well. And while I've got the people module in both, or the people comment, you'll notice I got an asterisk because they don't function the same way. Again, in Lightroom, the people module is automatic going on in the background and you just click on it. You have to instigate it, so to speak, or activate it inside Lightroom Classic, and its end result is going to be similar, but takes longer and a little bit more interaction is needed on your part. Connections, I mentioned inside Lightroom, and again, that's taking you to the portfolio. That is not the same thing as collections. It's not a typo. Connections is a different thing that, again, go into your Adobe portfolio. We did mention albums, and my mistake, but I forgot to put collections over here, so I should have put collections and albums. They are very, very similar. So if you see albums in Lightroom, Lightroom Classic with its collections, very, very similar. Okay. You will notice some other small variations in Lightroom. I don't know if you noticed it, but there are only 2 grid choices as opposed to multiples inside Lightroom Classic, such as compare and survey are missing. You don't see those in Lightroom, but you have 2 different types of grid choices in Lightroom itself. Compare and survey in Classic, more grids over here. Does it balance out? Now this next line is one that is near and dear to me because it's on my workflow. So hopefully there'll be some changes coming here. But if you're in Lightroom, yeah, you'll still see the 5 stars. And if you're a Canon user, that rate button on the back of your camera also transfers itself over to stars. So I would strongly recommend, if you've got a 5D whatever, or if you've got a 7D, some of the newer Canon cameras, take advantage of the rate button on the back of your camera, because you'll wind up seeing that when those images are brought into Lightroom. So the stars 1 through 5 are still there, but a little tweak that Adobe has done. Pict is still there, but instead of using P like it does in Classic, it uses the letter Z. So Pict equals Z when you move over. Rejected is still the same, but one of my favorites that isn't there just yet, and remember that Lightroom is much, much newer and rapidly coming up to same feature sets as Lightroom Classic. I hope they move color labels over, because I use them all the time in my workflow when I'm doing my culling especially, or with customers helping them make their decisions about which images they would prefer to move forward with. But color labels is not in Lightroom just yet. Zoom is in both. Film strip is in both. It's a little bit different on Lightroom Classic than it is inside Lightroom. Activity we talked about a while ago. That's where, again, people can either like or share text messages with you inside your Adobe portfolio. We talked about export and share inside Lightroom. Export over here. The Lightroom Classic export capabilities are leaps and bounds above what those are in Lightroom. But again, Lightroom itself, relatively new, making rapid progress. I hope they'll have more of that coming. One big advantage of Lightroom Classic, not only can you build zillions of different types of exports, you can build a lot more presets than you can in Lightroom. Of course, the way they've simplified Lightroom, you don't need them as much. But in Lightroom Classic, exporting and presets are much, much stronger, at least at this point. Sync, while being both called sync, remember the way the storage works with Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic and their use of the Creative Cloud is different. So you'll want to take a closer look at those before you overload your subscription's storage space. And then down through here, I've mentioned some of these different variances on names. Light includes these things where they call it basic tone underneath the basic section of Lightroom Classic. Color is where basic's presence section comes into it. You'll notice they moved the color mixer over to the color tab over here. And then HSL color right? That's where that comes into it, those two things. You will still see the same effects. You'll still see the same details, although slightly different naming in some cases. Again, remember that optics equals lens correction and geometry equals transform. So a lot of the same things there. So while you will see an awful lot of the same features going from Lightroom Classic and migrating over to Lightroom itself, or using both at the same time since you can install them on the same device at the same time, just be aware that there are a couple of different verbiage changes you might want to get used to. But the great thing about when you're inside Lightroom, once again, you can go inside Lightroom and take advantage of that learn capability and quickly ramp up to speed on how to use their newer device. Again, my biggest thoughts about using Lightroom over Lightroom Classic is its portability. Again, if you're using your mobile devices such as your phone, your iPad, things like that, if you're traveling or you just need a way of capturing things and then enhancing them with a desktop app, it's a fantastic solution for any of those particular possibilities. Here's a quick synopsis of it. Again, Lightroom, learn and discover. You can also access your images on your desktop or mobile device. You make a change on the desktop, you'll see it on the mobile device. You make a change on the mobile device, you'll see it on your desktop. It does sync with the Adobe Cloud and allows you to take your images with you on a plane, in the car, etc. Makes it more portable, as I mentioned. But you can also store locally for offline access. So if you need to work on something on your device and you know you're not going to have wireless, then you can also store locally. But it still does allow you to organize, categorize, add information, track activity, all sorts of things. And you can either share one at a time, all, or on Adobe Portfolio. And of course, with Lightroom Classic, there's still some things that are in Classic that are not available in Lightroom itself, including tethering. Tethering is not available, whether it's Canon, Nikon, or any other. You won't see that in Lightroom just yet. You won't see some of my favorites like color labels. You won't see the different modules. I will mention, even though Lightroom does not have a map module any more than it has a book, slideshow, print, or web, the map module, if you have a GPS device like your phone, your iPad, or a camera that's added that to the metadata, etc., you will see those in Lightroom, but it's per image. It's a little bit different idea. It will show you a map of where that image was taken, but it doesn't lay it out quite like it does in Classic. Another feature I'm looking forward to seeing over in Lightroom coming soon, I hope, is the ability to do soft proofing. For those of you who are not comfortable with what soft proofing is, if you're in Lightroom Classic, you've got an image pulled up, you're in the Develop module, if you hit the letter S, as in soft, you'll see the screen will change ever so slightly, and what it's going to show you, based on the profile that you have loaded up at the time, what that image would look like if you were to print it based on that. In my specific example, as a Miller's user, I've gotten with the Miller's website and grabbed their print profiles of their specific printers. So when I hit S inside Lightroom Classic, it shows me what it's going to look like on their specific printers. And they have two profiles, by the way. There's a standard and there's also a matte finish, which looks entirely different. So imagine if you've ever run into those problems where you've printed, gotten an image and it's too dark, it's too light, it doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. Could have been because you didn't have your monitor calibrated and other things like that. But a secondary step is taking advantage of your print shop's print profiles and then taking advantage of soft proofing in Classic. So once again, I hope that's a feature that bounces over into Lightroom sometime soon. We mentioned how right now Lightroom Classic is still much better on presets. So many different presets you can build inside Lightroom Classic. Import, export, tons of different ways you can make presets for all sorts of different things. And a lot of those are coming from third-party collaborations where you can get them from all sorts of different vendors and some of your favorite photographers, etc. That's not in Lightroom itself just yet, but the Discover module can help you get there pretty quickly on your own in many cases. So, covered off on an awful lot of information in a very small amount of time, but I hope you've enjoyed this event, this TPPA event, What's New with Lightroom, as we looked at Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, and to an extent Lightroom Mobile. Remember, Lightroom looks just like your mobile app. There's small variations within an iPhone, but if I'm looking at the Lightroom app on my desktop and I look at it on my phone, I'm looking at virtually the same feature sets on both of them. So Lightroom, Lightroom Mobile, consider them one and the same in many ways. Then there's Lightroom Classic, the one we've known for years and years and years. I hope you've enjoyed this event. I will see you again in April. If in the meantime you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me, connect for more. You can reach me at that email address. Find me on Facebook. The bottom is my my business page. But reach out to me, and I look forward to our next opportunity again in April as we go forward with the TPA event, What's New with Lightroom.